الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia, I'm your host. The aim of Let the Quran Speak is to help you gain deeper insights into Muslims and Islam, as it is practiced here and in other parts of the world. In this episode, Near-Death Experiences, a Harvard neurosurgeon, Ibn Alexander, became a believer in the afterlife after he had a near-death experience. These experiences are surprisingly common. They include out-of-body sensations and images of life events, religious figures, and even heaven. What lies behind these experiences? We'll be looking at those questions shortly. But first, at the time of Hajj and the celebration of Eid, we hear a great deal about Abraham, and rightly so. He was one of the great prophets of Islam. But what about members of Abraham's family? They played significant roles in history too. Here to discuss their contributions, Brother Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
We talk a lot about Abraham, but his family members also made important contributions. Can you tell us, give us a brief summary of who his family members were?
Well, the popular figures in the Islamic tradition would be his wife, Sarah, and his other wife, Hagar. In the Bible, she's referred to as a concubine, said to be given to Abraham by his wife, Sarah, when Sarah was unable to conceive and thought that she can have children through her maidservant, Hagar, by giving her to Abraham.
So in the Islamic tradition, she's his wife?
This is how she's commonly regarded, as the wife of Abraham. And then we have, of equal prominence, perhaps even more prominent, Abraham's two sons, Isaac on the one hand, who became the forefather of many biblical prophets, and Ishmael on the other hand, who became the forefather of the last of the prophets, Muhammad, on whom be peace.
Mm-hmm. So tell us the story of the birth of Ishmael. Because that's sort of significant in the Islamic tradition.
Yes, both the births of Abraham of Abraham's two sons are significant,
yes,
and both are mentioned in the Quran. But Muslims have been particularly interested in the birth story of Ishmael because of his special relationship to the Prophet Muhammad, whom Muslims believe to be the last of all of the prophets and a universal prophet with a message for the entire world. In the Bible, it is mentioned that Abraham was approaching his, well into his old age when he had the first son. He was already 86 years old when Isaac was born. And then it would be some 14, when Ishmael was born rather, and then it will be some 14 years later that Isaac would be born. The story is given in the Quran in Surah As-Saffat in the 37th chapter, where it is mentioned that Abraham prayed and said, Rabbi habli minas salihin, my Lord, give me a righteous child. And the story continues to say that when this child reached an age when he could work with his father, that is when Abraham saw in a vision that he was about to sacrifice his son. The Muslim commentators, especially Ibn Kathir and some others, tie this story with the mention of Ishmael. In other words, the story itself, as given in the Quran in this passage, does not mention the name Ishmael. And some earlier commentators had taken this to be a reference to Isaac, actually.
Because the Bible mentions Isaac.
Because the Bible mentions Isaac, and the Bible shows that Isaac, on whom be peace, was the son to be sacrificed. But in the Islamic tradition, it has come about that the predominant view emerging is that Ishmael was the son to be sacrificed. And Ibn Kathir in his tafsir argues strongly for this. And he takes this passage to be a reference to Ishmael.
So tell us about the sacrifice, because it's an important story for Muslims. And Muslims commemorate the sacrifice even today.
Yes, it survived as a tradition among the Arabs even before the Prophet Muhammad began to preach, that they would offer a sacrifice, and they were doing this in memory of their forefather Ishmael, who was to be offered up in a sacrifice, but a lamb or a sheep or even a goat, according to varying traditions, was offered instead, having been provided by God, instead of the boy being sacrificed. So in the Islamic tradition, this has continued as being one of the rituals that the pilgrims perform when they go for the pilgrimage. And also more generally on the day of Eid, which is the day following the main day of the Hajj ceremonies. Everywhere in the world, Muslims would also commemorate that event by sacrificing an animal. And even more so, at the birth of a child, Muslims also celebrate by offering a sacrifice, and that is linked to the same memory of Abraham and the sacrifice he was willing to offer.
Is there anything else significant about Ishmael? Apparently he helped Abraham to build the Kaaba?
Yes, when the Quran says that Abraham laid the foundation of the Kaaba, it mentions both Abraham and Ishmael, that the two of them worked together in doing this. The Bible says that Abraham took his concubine and her child and left them in the wilderness of Paran. And there are many suggestions as to where exactly Paran is located. But on the other hand, in the Islamic tradition, we have it that they actually settled in what it would later on become Mecca. The story in the Islamic tradition is that the lady was there with her baby. There was no sign of civilization at the time, and no source of food or water. So she fed her baby as much as she could with the water supply that Abraham had left with her. And eventually even her teats were dry, and she looked for water for her baby. She went from one hillock to another, looking for some passing caravan, anybody who might have water, and she found none. Eventually, she heard the voice of the angel Gabriel, who then, by hitting the soil, caused the water of the well of Zamzam to gush forth, and that water is still flowing to this day. Pilgrims bring that water back to share it with their friends and relatives with the belief that this water has healing properties. Or that at least when one drinks this water and asks God for anything, that God will grant it. And usually people pray for health and well-being and knowledge as they drink this water.
We don't hear a lot about Isaac. Is there any significance to him in Islamic history?
Yes, and his story is mentioned in the Quran, in the 11th chapter of the Quran, for example. It is mentioned that the angels came and gave the news to Sarah that she would have a child, and she laughed because she had reached her old age, and she had not been known to be fruitful in bearing children. She in fact thought that she was barren, so she's wondering, how can I have a child? So both the birth of Isaac and of Ishmael are celebrated in the Quranic text.
So it seems like Abraham's family then was a righteous family and a supportive family, supportive to his mission. Yes,
his wife Hagar in particular, when being left in the desert, according to Islamic tradition, asked Abraham, "Why are you leaving us?" And he didn't answer. Perhaps he didn't know what to say, but when she asked him, "Is this the command of God?" he nodded, and this is when she said, "Well, in that case, I'm sure that God will not leave us to perish." So she had faith in God and trust in Him. In the Bible, it is mentioned that this event came about, that Hagar had to be left with her son in the wilderness because of Sarah's jealousy. But that is not mentioned in the Quran, that Sarah was jealous, and from the Islamic tradition we get the idea that Abraham was acting here on divine instruction, and there is a divine plan that unfolds later that Abraham himself could not have fully envisioned. He prayed for God to make this region fruitful, barren though it was at the time, and he asked God to cause the hearts of people to be inclined towards his family. And indeed, this has all played out in history. What was there a barren region then became busy Mecca, and now busy with 2 million pilgrims flocking there from various parts of the world, drawn not only to these sacred sites, but also to the love of the family of Abraham.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break when we return. Near-death experiences.